The chains of custom. Breaking free into the light of truth. A Grail-inspired guide to spiritual freedom and individual awakening. Foreword. The silent prison, humanity's unseen bondage. There is a silent prison upon the earth, vast, invisible, and yet enclosing nearly every soul that walks within flesh. Its walls are not made of stone, nor its bars of iron, yet its strength surpasses both. It is woven of thoughts, beliefs, customs, fears, traditions, and the inherited chains of the generations. Men call it culture, heritage, duty, religion, and society, yet in truth, it is the unseen bondage that fetters the spirit of man from rising freely toward the light. Everywhere, humanity praises freedom, yet few know what it truly is. For the freedom that most seek is but license to act according to personal desire, while the freedom of the spirit, the true freedom, remains unknown. This inner freedom can only come when man lives in harmony with the immutable laws of creation, in obedience to the will of God, which is life and truth itself. Where these laws are ignored, bondage begins, no matter how noble the names that conceal it. From the cradle, man is shaped not by his awakened spirit, but by the mold of his environment. He learns to think, feel, and act according to patterns already established by those before him. The living flame within, which would guide him to what is true and right, is smothered beneath layers of opinions, customs, and human doctrines. Thus, he grows into an image pleasing to men but foreign to his own soul. The tragedy is not merely that humanity lives in error, but that it worships its own chains. Men defend their ancestral customs even when these customs defy the living truth. They cling to religious traditions that no longer breathe the light of God but echo only human will. They exalt collective identity above spiritual individuality. They fear to question the inherited path, lest they be mocked, exiled, or called traitors to their blood and tribe. And yet, the voice of truth still speaks, softly, steadfastly, through the quiet conscience, through suffering, through longing, through the pain of the soul that knows it was made for more. It whispers, "Awaken, O child of man. The light calls you forth from among the dead. Do not worship what enslaves you. Rise into the freedom of the living will, which knows and does what is right before God." True awakening is never rebellion against man but obedience to the eternal law. He who awakens does not destroy, he clarifies. He does not despise his people or their ways, but he distinguishes between what is living and what is dead. He loves, but with eyes open to truth. He respects, but not at the cost of conscience. He serves, but only in what uplifts. Every soul that truly seeks the light must, sooner or later, come to this threshold, the point where the voice of the Spirit speaks louder than the voices of the world. Then begins the inner struggle, between loyalty to form and fidelity to truth, between the comfort of conformity and the courage of obedience to the light. Few pass this gate unscathed. Many falter, for the bonds of human opinion are thick as chains of iron. Others, misunderstanding freedom, break all bonds in blind revolt, only to forge new fetters from pride and self-will. But the few, the truly awakened, find the narrow path, freedom through surrender to the divine law, liberation through obedience to truth, peace through inner purity. The Grail Message comes as a mirror for this age, to expose the false foundations, to separate appearance from reality, and to show man once again the order of life as willed by the Creator. It reveals that every bondage, whether outward or inward, arises from the same root, disobedience to the law of the Spirit. Only when man returns to living in accordance with this law can he step out of the prison he himself built. The time has come for humanity to understand that salvation does not lie in ancestry, in religion, or in belonging to a group, but in becoming, in being, a true human spirit in harmony with the will of God. The light demands individuality born of truth, not conformity born of fear. For only a living spirit, standing upright and free, can serve as a true son of the light within the order of creation. Therefore, this book does not call men to rebellion, but to awakening, not to contempt of customs, but to their purification, not to abandon the outer world, but to illuminate it with inner truth. For he who stands in the light becomes a liberator by his very being, his presence loosens the chains of others, as the dawn dispels the night. Let every reader approach these pages with humility and courage. Let him be willing to look within and to see where his own chains lie hidden. For no man is truly free who fears the opinion of others more than he reveres the will of God. The Spirit longs for light, and the light now calls, not to the multitude as a mass, but to each soul individually. Come forth from the prison of shadows. Stand in the radiance of truth. Be free, not as man defines freedom, but as God wills it. Preface. The cry for freedom, the Spirit's struggle in a world of forms. Deep within the heart of every human being lies a yearning that no hand can silence, no law can restrain, and no chain can break, save one, the recognition of the truth. It is the cry of the Spirit for freedom, the holy unrest that stirs when the soul begins to remember its origin, the light. From the first breath upon this earth, man is surrounded by forms. Forms of thought, forms of conduct, forms of religion, forms of love, forms of worship. He is taught what to think, how to act, and whom to obey. His world becomes a tapestry of inherited patterns, woven long before he ever drew his first breath. And yet, within him, the living spark of spirit remains untouched, waiting for its hour to awaken and proclaim, "I am not of the forms, I am of the light." But alas, this cry is seldom heard in its purity. For the noise of the world, the expectations of family, the voices of priests and elders, the demands of society, all rush in to drown it out. The Spirit's call for freedom becomes faint, buried beneath the fear of rejection, the hunger for acceptance, and the longing to belong. Thus begins the tragedy of the soul, the silent suffocation of the living by the dead. The struggle within. Every awakening spirit knows this battle. The moment it turns toward truth, the chains begin to rattle. Customs resist, family reproaches, religion condemns. The comfortable forms that once gave security now become fetters. For the light exposes what is false, and the false cannot bear exposure. The awakened one begins to see, much that is praised as holy, is born not from the will of God, but from the will of men. Many traditions are but shadows of former truths, hollow shells from which the spirit of life has long departed. Yet men still cling to them, exalting the husk above the kernel, and the word above the essence. So the soul stands between two worlds, the outer that demands conformity, and the inner that calls for truth. This is the narrow path, the lonely gate spoken of by all messengers of light. It cannot be walked by the multitude, each must pass through it alone, guided only by the quiet flame of conscience, the voice of the Spirit within. The nature of true freedom. True freedom is not revolt. It is not the throwing off of all authority or the destruction of all form. True freedom is inner clarity, to recognize what is of the light and what is not, and to choose in obedience to truth. For as long as man still rebels blindly against outer authority, he is not yet free. He merely exchanges one master for another, his own unpurified will. Freedom begins only when he bows willingly to the divine law that governs all creation. This surrender is not weakness, it is strength. It is not defeat, it is victory. For the spirit that bends before the will of God stands upright before all men. Thus, the cry for freedom is not a cry against form itself, but against falsehood, hypocrisy, and lifeless tradition. It is a cry for the restoration of order, the divine order that once ruled all existence before human arrogance disrupted it. The world of forms and the dormant spirit. The world today is full of motion but void of movement toward light. Men build temples, but their hearts are empty. They worship doctrines, but ignore truth. They obey laws, but transgress the law. They seek recognition from one another, but not the approval of the Creator. Outwardly, they appear religious, moral, cultured, yet inwardly, many are bound, suffocating beneath the weight of self-made dogmas. Even those who sense their chains often mistake rebellion for liberation. They cast off the forms of their fathers only to create new idols out of science, intellect, or personal spirituality. They reject God's name but still bow to human opinions. Thus, the circle of bondage continues. Only in silence can the cry of the Spirit be heard. Only in stillness can the thread of truth be found again. The Grail Message comes to teach this, that the laws of creation are living bridges between God and man, and that whoever lives in their harmony stands free, no matter where he is placed. The cost of awakening. To awaken is to suffer. Not because awakening brings pain, but because it reveals the pain that has always been there, the discord between the light within and the darkness without. He who awakens will often walk misunderstood. He may lose friends, family, and position. Yet what he gains is of far greater worth, the peace of truth and the strength of clarity. The awakened spirit is no longer a leaf blown by the wind of human opinion. He stands rooted in the eternal law, unmoved by praise or blame. He loves without attachment and obeys without fear. He becomes a witness of the light amid the confusion of the world, a living example that freedom is possible only through obedience to God's will. The purpose of this book. This book is written for those who have begun to feel this inner unrest, who sense that something in their inherited life no longer fits the rhythm of their soul. It is a guide to those who stand at the threshold between conformity and truth, between bondage and freedom. It will not flatter nor console, it will challenge, awaken, and clarify. It will lead the reader through the layers of illusion, family bondage, societal pressure, ancestral inheritance, religious dogma, until the spirit emerges pure, upright, and luminous before its creator. Each chapter will unfold as a light upon a shadow, exposing what binds, revealing the law behind it, and showing the path of liberation. For the Grail Message does not come to destroy, but to fulfill, to restore the harmony between spirit, law, and life. Let every reader come not merely with the intellect, but with the open heart. Let him not seek agreement, but understanding. For the light does not argue, it shines. And when it shines, all darkness, even that hidden within ourselves, must yield. Then the cry for freedom will at last find its answer, not in rebellion, not in reform, but in transformation. The spirit will stand upright once more, and the world of forms will take its rightful place beneath, not above, the living soul. And the word will echo through all existence once more, as in the beginning. Let there be light. Introduction. Born into chains, the hidden inheritance of human bondage. Before a child takes its first breath upon the earth, it already breathes in the atmosphere of the world into which it is born. Invisible yet powerful threads of influence stretch from generations past, weaving a net around every newborn soul. Family expectations, ancestral traditions, tribal customs, national ideologies, religious dogmas, all converge to shape what the child will one day call life. Yet, long before it learns to speak or walk, its spirit has already been enclosed within invisible walls built not by the Creator, but by men. The inheritance of forms. Man is born into forms, forms of thought, behavior, worship, and relationship. These forms were once alive, for they arose from experiences of truth at some earlier time. But through the centuries, they hardened. What once flowed with living understanding became rigid law, what once uplifted became oppressive. Thus, the descendants of those who once walked in freedom now serve the empty shells of former truths. This is the hidden inheritance of mankind, a world where the form has triumphed over the essence, where the letter suffocates the spirit, and where conformity has replaced understanding. Even before one chooses, the path seems chosen for him, his name, his belief, his role, his destiny. And because these boundaries are accepted as sacred and immutable, few ever question them. Yet the spirit, the eternal wanderer from the light, cannot be contained forever. Sooner or later, a stirring begins within. A vague uneasiness, a quiet whisper, this cannot be all. There is more, there must be more. This whisper is the call of the light to the imprisoned soul, the reminder that man was not born to serve the dead forms of his fathers, but to serve the living will of God that pulsates eternally through all creation. The roots of bondage. The bondage of mankind does not begin in laws, nor in governments, nor even in religion. It begins in fear, the fear of standing alone before truth. Fear of rejection, of loss, of judgment, of isolation. Fear that one's own inner voice might be wrong. So men silence their conscience to remain accepted. They trade freedom for approval, light for comfort, truth for belonging. From this inner fear arises the outward tyranny of systems and traditions. Those who submit in weakness soon become those who demand submission from others, perpetuating the cycle. The chains of bondage thus extend from generation to generation, forged not of iron, but of ignorance and fear. In this way, mankind binds itself. No demon, no fate, no divine will decree this servitude. It is man who, through the misuse of his free will, created a web that now entangles him. And because this web is spiritual, woven from thoughts, desires, and beliefs, no political revolution or social reform can truly free him. Only a revolution within the soul can. The sleep of the spirit. Most people do not feel bound, because they no longer feel at all. They have become accustomed to the weight of their chains. Like captives born in prison, they mistake the walls for the world. The voice of the spirit, once vibrant and commanding, has grown faint from neglect. It whispers now only in moments of crisis, when all outer securities crumble. In such moments, the spirit longs to rise, to act according to the inner law of truth. But then, family, tradition, or social opinion rushes in to suppress it. This is how things are done, they say. You must obey. And again, the spirit bows, returning to its slumber, imprisoned beneath conformity. Yet the divine law does not sleep. It continues to work silently within all things, urging each soul toward awakening. Through pain, loss, and unrest, it shakes the sleeping one until he begins to question. For the purpose of suffering is not punishment, it is correction. It loosens the chains forged by falsehood and turns man's gaze once more toward the light. The tyranny of the familiar. Every age praises itself for its progress, yet few see that the same spirit of bondage wears new garments in every generation. Yesterday, men were enslaved by kings. Today, they are enslaved by public opinion. Yesterday, they bowed to idols of wood and stone. Today, they bow to the idols of money, success, and social approval. Yesterday, religion dictated thought. Today, the media and popular culture do. But the effect is the same: the suppression of the spirit's individuality, its divine right to perceive, to choose, and to live according to truth. The human being, created to stand upright and free before his Creator, crawls again in servitude to men and their creations. No outward progress can alter this inner condition. Man may conquer the skies, invent machines, and map the stars, yet if he cannot listen to the voice of his spirit and follow it despite the world, he remains a slave. The path of liberation. Liberation begins not in rebellion, but in recognition. One must first see the chains, not with the eyes of the intellect, but with the awakening of the spirit. The Grail Message teaches, you are bound only so long as you cling to that which binds you. Once man recognizes that every falsehood, every fear, every inherited dogma has power only because he sustains it, the cords begin to fall away. But this recognition demands courage, the courage to stand before God alone, without the support of ancestral belief or communal approval. It demands purity, for only the pure in heart can perceive the working of divine laws clearly. And it demands faith, not blind belief in words or books, but trust in the living guidance of the Spirit through the light. When man begins to live according to these, his environment, his relationships, and his circumstances begin to transform. The chains fall away one by one, not through violence, but through understanding. He no longer fears the opinions of others, for he knows the only judgment that matters is that of the light. He no longer clings to tradition for safety, for he finds safety in the law. Then, for the first time, he begins to live as a free spirit within the will of God. The coming separation. The time has come upon the earth when the difference between the bound and the free will become clear. For the light is intensifying. It calls forth all that is hidden. The masks of religion, culture, and false morality will crumble before it. Every soul will be confronted by its own inner truth. Those who cling to human laws and customs against the will of God will feel pain, confusion, and collapse, for what is false cannot withstand the light. But those who have quietly purified themselves and obey the voice of the Spirit will stand firm, radiant, and uplifted, as free children of God amid the storm. Therefore, let every reader take this message not as theory, but as living law. Examine your life, your beliefs, your loyalties. Ask in silence, is this born of the light, or of fear? If it is of fear, let it go. If it is of light, let it live and grow. Then will your cry for freedom be answered, not by men, not by society, but by the law itself. And you will know, through your own experience, the truth of the sacred words. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Chapter 1. The Web of Influence, How Society Shapes the Soul. Every human being, from the moment of birth, steps into an invisible yet tangible web, a structure not woven of silk or steel, but of thoughts, emotions, habits, expectations, and traditions. This web, vast and intricate, envelops entire nations and tribes, families and individuals. It vibrates with every word spoken, every idea cherished, every custom upheld. It is the unseen atmosphere within which every human soul lives, breathes, and acts, the psychic climate of the world. And within this living web, the spirit either awakens and grows upward toward the light, or remains trapped, dull and lifeless, bound by the very influences it once helped to sustain. The law of environment, attraction by similarity. Nothing in creation happens by chance. Every soul incarnates into the exact environment whose nature reflects its own inner maturity. This is the working of the law of reciprocal action and the law of attraction of homogeneous species. A spirit that in past lives has woven thoughts of vanity, prejudice, and fear must be born among those of similar vibration, where such qualities prevail. A noble, truth-seeking spirit, by contrast, finds its way into a family or culture that can give it opportunity to serve and unfold its inner light. Thus, no one can rightly complain of his environment. It is a mirror of himself, a teacher, a reflection, a correction. But this mirror can easily become a prison if man ceases to learn and begins instead to conform blindly. For conformity without discernment is the death of the spirit's individuality. When man no longer questions the origin of his customs, the purpose of his beliefs, or the morality of his traditions, he falls into sleep. And in that sleep, he begins to move not according to the inner voice of conscience, but according to the outer rhythm of the crowd. Thus begins the spiritual decay that has enslaved humanity through centuries. The layers of the web. This web that surrounds the human soul is built of countless threads. At the outermost layer lie social expectations, the rules of behavior that define what is acceptable or normal. Beneath these are the cultural traditions that shape thought and feeling, what one must wear, eat, celebrate, and believe. Still deeper lie religious dogmas, which often replace the living connection to God with rigid doctrines and rituals. And at the very core of this web lies fear, the fear of rejection, of difference, of standing alone before truth. Fear gives strength to all the other layers. If fear were removed, no tradition, no law, no authority could bind a soul that stands firm in the light. But as long as fear reigns, man clings to the herd, drawing his sense of security from the approval of others rather than from the assurance of inner truth. This is the tragedy of mankind, to seek peace in conformity instead of finding freedom in obedience to divine law. The builders of the web. It is easy to blame society, but society is nothing other than the collective expression of all who live within it. Each person contributes to this web through his daily thoughts, words, and deeds. Every judgment, every gossip, every prejudice sends out vibrations that attach themselves to the invisible structure of human coexistence. These vibrations, gathering and intertwining, form thought forms that influence others, pressing upon them like invisible weights. Thus, even as men complain of the burdens imposed by society, they continue to strengthen those very burdens through their own words and actions. He who condemns without love, who upholds falsehood for convenience, who enforces tradition without understanding, all these are builders of the web. And because the web is woven by mankind, mankind must also be the one to undo it, thread by thread, through recognition and purification. The subtle tyranny of influence. Influence does not speak with loud voice, it whispers. It does not command with chains, it persuades with comfort. It tells the young, this is how it has always been done. It tells the thinker, do not question too deeply. It tells the seeker, stay where it is safe. And thus, without realizing it, whole generations walk in the shadows of inherited thought, never once perceiving that they are not truly thinking, but merely repeating. Such influence is powerful because it operates beneath the threshold of awareness. It dresses itself in noble words, tradition, honor, loyalty, culture, faith, yet often it conceals within these garments the corpse of truth long dead. The living truth can never contradict the laws of God. It breathes freedom, light, and harmony. But when men begin to exalt their own customs above these laws, they cease to serve the Creator and begin to serve themselves. And the more they do so, the thicker grows the web around them, until whole nations suffocate in the threads of their own weaving. The silent suffering of the awakened. Among such people live the awakened, those few whose spirits have begun to feel again. They sense the falseness of much that others praise. They feel out of place among their kindred. Their hearts long for something purer, higher, freer. Yet when they speak of this, they are mocked or shunned. Families call them rebellious, societies brand them heretics, and religions call them lost. But in truth, such souls are not rebellious, they are remembering. They are remembering their origin in the light, and the natural law of freedom that belongs to all who live in harmony with it. Their suffering arises because they still stand partly entangled in the web they now see. They must learn to untangle themselves not through defiance, but through quiet obedience to truth, through steadfastness in purity, through courage to act rightly even when misunderstood. This is the way of liberation, not to destroy the web through violence, but to step out of it through clarity and strength of spirit. For no chain forged by ignorance can endure the radiance of awakened consciousness. The light and the web. The Grail Message reveals that light and darkness cannot dwell together. Where the light shines, shadows dissolve. But the light does not force its way, it must be invited through purity of heart and humility of spirit. When a man begins to live in accordance with truth, his radiations change. His thoughts no longer sustain the lower vibrations of fear and conformity. Gradually, the threads that once held him loosen, for they find no resonance in him. Then his presence itself becomes a light in the web, a point of awakening for others still asleep. He does not need to preach or rebel, his being radiates truth silently. The web begins to change not through revolution, but through transformation, as more and more souls awaken, each illuminating his own surroundings. Thus the work of liberation spreads from individual to collective, from soul to society, from society to humanity. This is the quiet yet mighty redemption of the world. The law of freedom. Freedom is not granted by men, nor can it be taken by them. It is a state of being in harmony with the divine will. He who obeys this will is free, even in prison. He who disobeys it is bound, even on a throne. True liberation is therefore an inner event, a realignment of the will with the law. When man recognizes this, he ceases to blame his society, his culture, his family. He begins instead to purify himself, to radiate differently, and through this change, the outer conditions adjust naturally. For the outer world is but the reflection of the inner state. Let, therefore, every seeker understand. To reform society without reforming oneself is to weave again the very web one seeks to escape. To free humanity, one must first free oneself from every falsehood that clings within. Then, and only then, will the earth begin to know true peace, for the peace of the world begins in the victory of the spirit over the web of influence. The call to rise. The time is ripe. The light increases. The vibration of the earth is being purified. The old webs tremble. The ancient bonds loosen. Each soul is now being tested, whether it will cling to what is decaying, or rise into the radiance of what is eternal. Let him who feels the call not delay. For soon, the separation will be complete. The bound will remain with the bound, and the free will dwell among the free. Therefore, awaken now. Cease repeating the errors of your fathers. Live as a child of the light, truthful, pure, fearless. Then the web shall no longer hold you, and your life shall become a ray of liberation to others still entangled. Thus speaks the law, thus works the light, thus fulfills the word. Chapter 2. The Ancestral Shadows, Inherited Beliefs and Karmic Chains. Every soul is born into a lineage, a stream of blood and memory, of culture and faith, of joy and pain. Within that stream flow countless thoughts, words, and deeds, unhealed, unresolved, often unacknowledged. And through these unseen rivers, invisible threads extend from the past into the present, from ancestors into descendants, binding generations together in one continuous weave of cause and effect. The earth remembers, the blood remembers, the soul remembers. Nothing in creation is lost, for the law of reciprocal action ensures that every vibration once sent forth must return to its origin, whether in this life or another. Thus, mankind does not merely inherit physical features and social traditions, but also the spiritual atmosphere created by the choices of those who came before. The invisible inheritance. Human beings often pride themselves on their ancestry. They speak of lineage, family honor, heritage. But few realize that along with the virtues and achievements of their forebears, they also inherit their unredeemed wrongs, their unresolved desires, their lingering attachments. For every thought ever formed is a living reality in the ethereal world, and as long as it remains unpurified, it seeks expression through the descendants who vibrate in similar nature. Therefore, the child who grows up fearing poverty may be under the shadow of a forefather who worshipped wealth. The family that struggles with endless discord may still be harvesting the fruits of unbridled pride or injustice committed long ago. And entire tribes or nations may carry within their collective aura the karmic echoes of oppression, conquest, or betrayal that once defined their history. Thus, the law remains exact, not as punishment, but as mercy, for through these returns, the soul is given the opportunity to rectify, to understand, to transform darkness into light. The law of affinity, why souls meet again. It is not coincidence that certain souls gather again and again as families. They are drawn together by similarity of vibration, by the unfinished threads of love, duty, or guilt woven between them in past lives. A parent and child, husband and wife, friend and foe, all are bound by the spiritual cords of former deeds and desires. Through these connections, each is given the chance to balance what was once distorted. The father who oppressed may be reborn as the son who suffers oppression, not as punishment, but as understanding. The deceived may meet the deceiver again, that both may learn truth. The unloved may become the parent, learning what it means to give what once was denied. This is the justice of God, absolute, unerring, incorruptible. No plea can sway it, no ritual can erase it, no prayer can circumvent it. It acts purely, in order and love, for it is not meant to condemn but to heal. Through it, every soul is offered the perfect circumstance to awaken, if only it will perceive the lesson behind the experience. The chains of belief. Yet, beyond karma, man inherits something even more subtle and binding, belief. Belief is thought made habitual. It shapes perception, dictates reaction, and defines what the soul deems possible. Most men never question the beliefs of their ancestors. They worship what their fathers worshipped, fear what their mothers feared, and reject what their elders rejected. They wear inherited opinions as garments of identity, calling them truth. But such beliefs, when untested by the light of inner knowing, become fetters. They prevent the spirit from rising beyond the narrow boundaries of tradition. They silence the voice within that seeks to lead man into direct experience of God. Even religion, once a living bridge between creator and creation, has in many places become a mausoleum of inherited words, a place where men repeat what others once felt, instead of feeling anew. Thus, the fire that should kindle the soul into radiant conviction has become cold ash, preserved by generations too fearful to let it burn again. Every seeker must therefore stand courageously before his inherited beliefs and ask, do these draw me nearer to the living truth, or do they keep me bound to the shadows of the past? For God does not demand loyalty to human tradition, but obedience to his laws, the same yesterday, today, and forever. The burden of the unredeemed. There are also the ancestral burdens, the emotional and spiritual residues of unhealed suffering. Unforgiven wrongs, unspoken griefs, hidden guilt, all form clouds around family lines. These clouds, unseen but real, press upon sensitive souls, influencing thought and mood, whispering through blood and memory. Often a person feels heaviness, fear, or sadness for no reason known to him. Yet within the ethereal threads of lineage, the reason lies. But this burden need not remain. When one descendant awakens to truth and purifies his own life, he becomes a channel of light through which the whole line can begin to heal. For in the spiritual world, light radiates backward and forward, purifying not only the self but all who are connected by affinity. Thus, a single soul standing firm in truth can redeem a multitude, simply by breaking the pattern within himself. What the ancestors bound through ignorance, he can unbind through awareness. What they darkened through fear, he can illumine through faith. Such is the redemptive power entrusted to every human being who dares to live consciously. The way of release. To free oneself from ancestral shadows, one must first bring them to light. For only what is recognized can be transformed. Begin, therefore, with inner stillness, a prayerful openness before God, and ask, what beliefs, habits, and fears do I carry that are not truly mine? What patterns keep repeating in my life that seek resolution? When these are revealed, do not resist them, and do not curse your ancestry. Honor them as teachers, for through them you are shown what needs purification. Then, with gratitude, release them by choosing differently, by living contrary to the darkness that once enslaved your line. If your ancestors lived in hatred, live in love. If they oppressed, serve. If they deceived, be truthful. If they feared, trust. Thus you close the circle and transform curse into blessing. But this work cannot be done in pride or resentment. Only humility before the divine will opens the gate to freedom. For it is not by rejecting one's lineage but by redeeming it through light that man fulfills his task in creation. The awakening of spiritual responsibility. When a man begins to live in this awareness, he ceases to blame his parents or past generations for his struggles. He recognizes that he, too, once helped weave these threads, that he chose this birth not by accident but by necessity, that he might rectify what once he distorted. Thus, every trial becomes opportunity, every conflict a lesson, every wound a gateway to purification. This is true maturity of the spirit, to see divine justice not as fate, but as love. For only through justice can harmony be restored. And when justice is embraced with gratitude, karma becomes grace. The dawn beyond the shadows. As the soul purifies itself, the ancestral shadows dissolve. What was once heavy becomes light, what was bitter becomes sweet. The chain of generations no longer binds but blesses. From the roots of the past rise new branches, bearing fruits of wisdom and peace. Then the soul stands radiant and free, knowing itself as part of the great current of life, yet no longer enslaved by it. It blesses its ancestors, not in blind devotion, but in luminous compassion. It understands that all were learners in the same vast school of experience, all groping toward the light. And in that understanding, the burden of centuries is lifted. This is the promise of awakening, that the past need not dictate the future, for in each moment of true recognition, eternity enters time and transforms it. Chapter 3. The Idol of Belonging, when conformity replaces truth. From the first cry of birth, man reaches out to be held, to be known, accepted, and loved. This yearning for connection is woven into the very fabric of his being, for man is not made to exist in isolation. He is part of a vast creation, linked by invisible threads to all that lives. Yet, what was meant to be a living bond in light has, through misuse, become a chain in darkness. For in his fear of standing alone before truth, man began to seek safety not in the will of God but in the approval of men. The Spirit's hunger for belonging. The Spirit in man seeks communion, with God, with creation, with fellow spirits. In its pure form, this yearning is noble. It is the same inner drive that makes the flower turn toward the sun. It is the longing to give and to receive in harmony, to serve, to uplift, to be part of the great rhythm of life. But when the soul turns away from the light, this same impulse degenerates into dependence, a craving for validation, an unholy need to be accepted even at the cost of truth. Thus began the worship of belonging. Man, afraid of rejection, began to mold his convictions to fit the crowd. He silenced the whisper of conscience to maintain peace with those around him. He bowed before customs, culture, religion, and public opinion, mistaking their approval for righteousness. And so the living faith of the Spirit became the dead habit of conformity. The mask of acceptance. Observe humanity today, and you will see countless souls wearing masks. Each mask bears the expression demanded by the circle in which the person lives, one for family, one for society, one for religion, one for career. Few dare to show their true face, for fear of being cast out. Yet in this masquerade, man loses the very thing that gives him worth before God, his authentic spiritual individuality. To belong outwardly, he betrays the voice within. He agrees where he should object. He kneels where he should stand. He laughs where he should weep. He blesses what he knows inwardly to be false, and in so doing, he denies his spirit. It is no small sin, for every such denial weaves darkness into the soul's garment. The spirit cannot grow in the soil of falsehood, no matter how richly it is praised by the world. For the laws of God are not impressed by public opinion, they respond only to truthfulness of soul. The tyranny of tradition. Nowhere has the idol of belonging found stronger altars than in tradition and religion. For centuries, men have built temples not to the living God but to their own inherited understanding of Him. They worship their ancestors' interpretations, their community's customs, their denomination's doctrines, and call it faith. But faith is not conformity, it is conviction born of inner experience. True faith does not repeat what others believe, it knows because it has perceived. And that perception can only come to a soul free from the fear of disapproval. Yet how many souls remain enslaved to religious forms long emptied of spirit? How many read sacred words without awakening the fire of truth within? How many cling to institutions that comfort the flesh but starve the soul? All because they fear standing alone, because they dread being labeled heretic, rebel, or unfaithful. But whoever fears man more than he reveres God has already chosen his master. And that master cannot lead him to the light. The family circle, the first school of conformity. Even in the home, where love should nurture freedom, conformity begins its subtle work. The child, radiant with intuitive purity, often sees and feels what the adults around him no longer perceive. He questions customs, refuses empty rites, and yearns for truth beyond appearances. But soon the pressure to fit in begins. He is told to be like others, to follow, not to feel. The light within him, if not protected, dims under the weight of parental expectation and societal approval. Thus, generation after generation, the same unexamined traditions continue, not because they are true, but because few dare to challenge them. And the voice of the Spirit, which should lead man upward, is drowned by the chorus of inherited opinions. The home, which should have been a cradle of individuality, often becomes its tomb. The fear of isolation, the spirit's test. Every seeker who begins to awaken must face this trial, the loneliness of standing in truth. It is a sacred test, meant to prove whether the spirit's allegiance lies with God or with men. For truth often demands separation before it grants union. One must first step out of the crowd to see clearly where it is heading. This is why the path of enlightenment is narrow, not because God desires exclusivity, but because few are willing to walk without human applause. Yet whoever endures the solitude of truth finds that he was never truly alone. For in that silence, the living presence of the light surrounds him. He discovers that the fellowship of the Spirit transcends earthly companionship. He learns that to stand with God, even if all men abandon him, is the only real belonging. The law of spiritual independence. The law of spiritual independence is written into creation itself. No spirit can develop by leaning on another. Each must perceive, decide, and act from within the light of its own intuition. Even the highest messengers of God can only point the way, they cannot walk it for another. Therefore, the more a person clings to human approval, the weaker his spirit becomes. But when he begins to act from inner conviction, even against the tide, power flows to him from the light. This is the mystery of true freedom. That the moment man ceases to depend on others for confirmation, he begins to draw directly from the source. Then his words carry weight, his deeds radiate force, and his presence uplifts others, not by effort, but by being aligned with truth. The false unity of the crowd. Mankind speaks much of unity, of togetherness, of belonging. But what kind of unity can exist among those who have denied their own truth? The crowd unites easily, yet its unity is built on fear, on compromise, on shared blindness. Such unity breeds stagnation, not peace. It suffocates the living spirit under the cloak of collective comfort. True unity arises only when each individual stands firm in truth, independent yet harmonious, like stars in the same constellation, each shining in its own orbit, yet together forming one radiant pattern. In such unity, conformity disappears, and divine order prevails. The way back to true belonging. To break free from the idol of belonging, man must begin with honesty, ruthless honesty with himself. He must dare to ask, am I doing this because it is right, or because it is expected? Do I believe this because it is true, or because it is safe? Am I following the light, or merely following the crowd? Then, when the answer comes, and it will come, quietly yet unmistakably, he must act upon it, even if it costs him the approval of all. For every step taken in obedience to inner truth loosens a chain that once bound the soul. Gradually, he will discover a new belonging, not among the multitudes, but within the living order of creation. He will feel the brotherhood of all pure spirits, the silent companionship of those who also walk in truth. He will belong, not to a sect or tradition, but to the eternal movement of light that flows through all worlds. And that belonging cannot be taken away, for it is not of man but of God. The return to simplicity. In the end, it is simple. To belong truly is to be true. All else is imitation, pretense, and slavery. When man becomes truthful in word, deed, and thought, he harmonizes with the divine will. Then the whole of creation welcomes him, not as a member of a group, but as a child of light fulfilling his purpose. This is the belonging the spirit longs for, not the warm approval of the crowd, but the quiet certainty of being one with the law of God. And when this is found, all fear of rejection vanishes, for the soul has returned home to itself. Chapter 4. The Law and the Custom, when man's rule opposes divine will. Every civilization writes its codes. Every people builds laws, traditions, and customs, saying, "This shall be our way." But only few ask whether their way still leads upward, toward light, purity, and truth. For where human will replaces divine will, there bondage begins. In the beginning, Divine law flowed like clear water through creation, self-acting, eternal, perfect. Every happening, every consequence, every reward and correction arose from it. Man was meant to recognize and harmonize with these living laws. He was not to invent his own standards, but to observe, understand, and follow the order already established by the Creator. But as the ages passed and the inner connection to the light weakened, man began to legislate according to his fears, his desires, and his convenience. He codified what pleased him, and forbade what threatened his comfort. He exalted the word, law, but severed it from the law of God. Thus, many customs that now appear noble and ancient are but distortions of living truth. They are shells, beautiful on the outside, empty within. And souls, born under their weight, mistake obedience to them for righteousness. Yet divine will is not contained in tradition. It is revealed afresh in every moment through the intuition of the awakened spirit. Wherever a human ordinance blocks this living current, it becomes an idol, a false authority opposing heaven. To follow such law is to rebel silently against God. But to follow the divine law, even when it breaks man's tradition, is to be free. For the law of God is not bound by time or culture. It is the same from age to age, for it springs from the source of truth. It requires only this: purity, justice, love, and service in all things. When man's laws contradict these eternal principles, the seeker must stand firm within, saying, "I will obey the law that lives, not the rule that dies." And though men persecute him, though society reject him, he stands upheld by the power of light, for all creation bears witness with him. Chapter 5. The Cloak of Religion, Faith or Fear. Religion, the very word once signified, to bind again, to reconnect man to his Creator. But how many religions today bind man, not to God, but to men? Many souls, seeking peace, enter temples and cathedrals, hoping to touch eternity. Yet they often find only repetition of words, ceremonies devoid of power, and leaders who demand obedience rather than awakening. And still they remain, afraid to question, fearing the loss of salvation if they step beyond their creed. Thus faith, the radiant trust in God's living presence, is replaced by fear, fear of damnation, fear of disapproval, fear of heresy. And fear cannot ascend to light. It binds, it enslaves, it dulls the spirit's wings. The Grail Message unveils the difference. Faith arises from knowing the law and trusting its justice. Fear arises from ignorance of that law, and from the belief that God can be swayed by flattery or ritual. True faith rests in the certainty that divine will is unchanging and perfect. Therefore, to walk in purity and truth is enough. No priest, no prophet, no dogma is needed to mediate between the soul and its maker, for the connection lies within. Yet many religions, afraid to lose control over men, have placed themselves between God and His children. They have declared that salvation lies only through their sacraments, their creeds, their approval. And mankind, too timid to trust its own spirit, submits. But whoever obeys out of fear does not serve God. He serves the idol of security. And every such idol must crumble when light shines upon it. When the seeker realizes that no outer authority can absolve or condemn him, he awakens. He sees that only the living purity of his will determines his path. He steps out from under the cloak of religion and stands bare before God, and in that nakedness, he finds peace. Then religion fulfills its true purpose again, not an institution, but an inner state of reconnection, living faith that radiates in every deed. Chapter 6. The False Covenant, Vows, Curses, and the Misuse of the Divine Name. In the ignorance of ages, man has often invoked the divine name to seal his own errors. He swore oaths, made vows, and pronounced curses, thinking these carried power before God. And indeed, they carried power, not from heaven, but from the law of reciprocal action, which binds every word spoken with conviction. To vow falsely is to enslave oneself spiritually. To curse in hatred is to forge chains from one's own darkness. To swear by the name of the Most High for selfish or deceitful ends is to misuse the vibration of the light itself. Such misuse builds walls between man and God. For the divine name is not a sound to be wielded, it is a vibration of pure truth. Whoever utters it without reverence calls down the law upon himself. Throughout history, false covenants have bound families, tribes, and nations. Men have pledged loyalty to error in God's name, they have shed blood believing it holy, they have enslaved others thinking it righteous. But divine law recognizes no oath made in darkness. Every vow contrary to love, purity, or justice dissolves under light, but not without consequence. Those who swore it must reap the pain that awakens them to truth. Therefore, the seeker must beware of binding his spirit through careless words. He must not promise what is against his conscience, nor curse another soul. The only true vow is the vow to live according to the will of God, in love, humility, and service. When such a vow is made, it frees rather than binds. It aligns the soul with the upward current of light, and every act thereafter becomes a prayer fulfilled indeed. Chapter 7. The Chains of Marriage, when Love Becomes Possession. Marriage, in its holy origin, was a union of two souls walking in harmony with divine law. It was meant to reflect the rhythm of giving and receiving, a living symbol of the eternal bond between God and creation. But in the hands of men, even this sacred union has often become a chain. When love becomes possession, it ceases to be love. When two souls seek to own rather than to serve one another, they begin to suffocate instead of uplift. The bond that should have been a bridge becomes a prison. True marriage is spiritual companionship, two beings helping each other fulfill the purpose of their existence, serving God through mutual growth. It cannot exist where fear, coercion, or domination reign. Neither custom nor law can make two spirits one, only love in truth can do that. Yet countless unions on earth are forged, not from love, but from pressure, family expectation, cultural demand, economic need, or lust. And so millions live together outwardly while remaining inwardly alone. Their souls cry silently for freedom, but tradition answers, "You must stay." The Grail light reveals, what God joins is bound by harmony, not by ceremony. No human vow can sanctify what is against the law of love. Therefore, to remain in such a union for appearance's sake is not righteousness, it is falsehood. When one partner awakens to truth and seeks the light, while the other clings to darkness, a gulf forms. The awakened one must pray, serve, and wait, but not at the cost of his or her spiritual life. For the soul that allows itself to be dragged down cannot help the other, it only adds to the weight of sorrow. The only indissoluble union is that of two souls united in the same divine striving. All others are temporary associations for learning, to be released when the purpose is fulfilled. Thus, even in marriage, freedom remains a law of the Spirit. For love cannot be commanded, it can only flow. Chapter 8. The Tyranny of Blood, the Family as Keeper or Jailer. Blood is a mystery of life, a vehicle of inheritance, carrying strengths and weaknesses, tendencies and memories. In the divine order, the family was meant to be a garden where souls could grow, protected and nurtured by love. But when blood becomes tyranny, the garden becomes a cage. How many souls remain bound to family expectations long after they have outgrown them? How many stifle their calling to please parents or preserve ancestral pride? How many fear to step into their divine task because it would bring shame upon their kin? Yet every spirit is born through a family, not for it. The family provides the soil, the seed must still grow according to its own nature. When the family demands uniformity at the expense of individuality, it violates the law of life. Parents who seek to control the path of their children block the very current of divine guidance meant to flow through them. Children who cling to parents beyond the natural bond hinder their own independence of spirit. The tyranny of blood ends only when love becomes pure, free from possession, pride, and fear. Then the family becomes again what it was meant to be, a circle of mutual service and growth, not of domination. Those who break free from inherited limitations are not betraying their family, they are fulfilling the divine purpose for which they were born into it. Their courage to live truthfully redeems the ancestral chain. For light, once anchored in a lineage through one awakened soul, begins to purify the whole. Chapter 9. The Voice Within, the Spirit's Call for Freedom. Through all the noise of tradition, custom, religion, and family, there remains one quiet call, the voice within. It is not loud, but its truth pierces every confusion. It speaks not in words, but in knowing. It is the presence of the divine will in man, the eternal compass pointing home. Many silence this voice, fearing its demand. For it always calls toward change, courage, and surrender. It asks the spirit to leave what is familiar and step into the living unknown of God's guidance. But the one who listens and obeys begins to live. Each obedience strengthens the inner link to the light until it becomes unbreakable. He no longer depends on priests, prophets, or family to tell him what is right, he knows. He no longer needs approval, he stands in truth. He no longer fears rejection, he walks in the peace of obedience. The voice within is the Grail in miniature, the living word echoing in the depths of the soul. When man follows it, he enters true freedom, for he acts in harmony with the eternal law. Then all outer bondage falls away, for nothing can bind one who serves the will of God in purity and joy. And this is the destiny of every awakened spirit. To rise from bondage into service. From conformity into conviction. From human fear into divine trust. When this happens, the earth will know peace again, for free spirits, united in truth, form the pillars of the coming light. Chapter 10. The Path of Courage, Standing Alone with God. There comes a moment when every spirit must stand alone. Not in defiance, but in fidelity. Not in rebellion, but in remembrance, the remembrance of its origin in God. The path of courage begins when all outward supports crumble. Friends misunderstand, family turns away, religion disowns, and the world condemns. Yet within, the still flame of conviction remains, the quiet knowing that the will of God is higher than the will of men. This is the hour of purification. For as long as man leans upon others for affirmation, he has not yet learned to walk upright before his Creator. He still seeks the comfort of agreement, the shelter of approval, the illusion of belonging. But the soul destined for freedom must pass through the valley of isolation. To stand alone with God is to stand in truth. It is to let go of every crutch, name, status, opinion, and face the eternal question. Am I living in harmony with the will of the light? He who answers, yes, and means it with his whole being, finds strength beyond measure. For in that surrender, courage arises, not from pride, but from faith. He fears no man, for he walks with the power that upholds worlds. Courage is not noise or defiance. It is calm steadfastness in the midst of storm, the silent confidence that light will prevail. It is the inner certainty that right action, however opposed, cannot fail in the end. Many will call such a one stubborn or proud, but they do not see the inward kneeling of his soul before the divine will. He has ceased to please men, because he has chosen to serve God. He no longer fears to lose, because he has found what cannot be taken. This is the path of the liberated, the narrow way that leads upward. Few find it, for few dare to walk alone. But whoever does shall discover that he is not alone at all, for the moment he stands with God, all the hosts of light stand with him. Chapter 11. Persecution and the Test, the Price of True Freedom. Every awakening is followed by trial. For the light that dawns within a man exposes the darkness around him, and darkness resists illumination. Those who serve the world will mock the one who serves God. Those who cling to comfort will persecute the one who clings to truth. It has always been so, it shall remain so until the harvest of separation is complete. The test of persecution reveals the depth of conviction. It asks, do you love the light enough to bear the world's hatred? It strips away every false motive, vanity, pride, self-glory, leaving only genuine faith or collapse. When the spirit endures in purity, the fire of trial becomes transmutation. It burns away fear, softens pride, and strengthens will. Through suffering, the soul becomes transparent to the light, and its radiance increases. Persecution, then, is not a curse but a crown. It is the divine measure by which authenticity is tested. For only the genuine can stand under the pressure of opposition, the false falls away. Yet many, when the test comes, retreat. They barter freedom for acceptance, conviction for comfort, truth for peace. But peace bought at the price of truth is only delay, the storm returns fiercer than before. He who perseveres learns that no human hand can harm the one protected by divine justice. Men may imprison, condemn, or slander, but they cannot touch the eternal essence within. That essence shines brightest in adversity, proving that light is unconquerable. Thus every persecution becomes a purification, and every wound a doorway to strength. For the spirit that remains faithful through trial becomes unshakable, a bearer of light in a world still veiled by fear. Chapter 12. The Light of the Law, Divine Justice Beyond Human Opinion. Justice, how often men speak of it, yet how little they understand. They measure it by convenience, sentiment, or revenge. But true justice is not opinion, it is law, eternal, exact, impersonal, and pure. Divine justice is woven into creation as cause and effect, sowing and reaping, vibration and return. It governs every thought, word, and deed with unfailing precision. There is no bribery, no favoritism, no partiality. The same sun shines upon the just and unjust, but each receives according to what he has prepared within himself. When man cries out, "Life is unfair," he confesses his blindness to this law. For the law never errs, it only reveals the hidden seeds we ourselves have sown. Therefore, the wise no longer complain. He sees that every pain is the result of ignorance or disobedience, and every joy the fruit of harmony. He accepts both with gratitude, learning and aligning ever more with divine will. Human opinion changes, divine law stands. Human judgment condemns, divine justice corrects. What men call punishment is only the returning echo of their own vibration, meant to awaken them to truth. When this understanding dawns, resentment ceases. The soul begins to live consciously, to sow good seed deliberately, to speak truthfully, to act purely. For he knows that every cause set in motion must ripen in time. Such awareness brings deep peace. For even when wronged by others, the enlightened one rests in certainty. The law will balance all in perfect time. He no longer fights shadows but aligns with the light, and in that alignment, he becomes free. Divine justice is not a threat, it is mercy. For through it, error is cleansed and harmony restored. He who trusts this law walks in serenity, for he knows, all things serve the purpose of God. Chapter 13. Knowledge and Obedience, the Keys of Liberation. To know is to see. To obey is to live. Without both, no soul can be free. Knowledge without obedience becomes pride, obedience without knowledge becomes blindness. Only their union creates wisdom. Many today seek knowledge, spiritual, scientific, or mystical, yet remain bound by self-will. They read of laws but do not live them. They admire truth but do not follow it. And so knowledge becomes burden, not blessing. For knowledge of divine law demands response. To understand the will of God and not to obey it is spiritual rebellion. It darkens the light within, making the soul guilty of deliberate transgression. Obedience, on the other hand, is liberation. Not submission to man, but alignment with the living current of truth. It frees the spirit from confusion, for it surrenders personal desire to divine order. The Grail word teaches, The highest knowledge is the recognition of God's will in all things. The highest obedience is joyful cooperation with it. When man begins to live this way, every circumstance becomes instruction, every difficulty a teacher, every encounter a message from the law. He no longer asks, "Why me?" but, "What am I to learn and purify here?" Thus he grows quickly, and the bonds of fate loosen. Knowledge reveals the path, obedience walks it. Together they open the gate of liberation, the gate long closed by ignorance and pride. The liberated one is no longer ruled by outer compulsion, for his will and the divine will have become one. And this unity is freedom itself, the peace that cannot be shaken by time or trial. Chapter 14. Forgiveness and Renunciation, Breaking Old Ties in Love. Forgiveness is not forgetfulness, nor indulgence, nor denial of justice. It is the release of bitterness, the cutting of cords that bind the soul to past pain. So long as resentment lives within, the spirit remains tied to those it condemns. It drags them everywhere in thought and emotion, unable to ascend. Forgiveness, then, is not a favor to others, but deliverance for oneself. Yet forgiveness alone is not enough, it must be joined with renunciation, the conscious letting go of every claim born of self-will. Renunciation is the cleansing fire of love. It says, "I release you to God's will. I seek nothing for myself but light." This act dissolves karmic threads woven through anger, attachment, and pride. It opens the way for divine compensation, which restores balance far better than any revenge could. Forgiveness heals the heart, renunciation frees the will. Together they prepare the soul for renewal. But many struggle, saying, "How can I forgive such wrong?" They forget that justice belongs to God, not man. The law will repay every deed exactly. Our task is only to keep the heart pure so that justice may work unhindered. The moment forgiveness is genuine, peace flows in like light through open windows. Bitterness fades, and compassion arises, not from weakness, but from strength. For the soul that forgives stands higher than the wrong done to it. To renounce is not to lose, but to gain. What is surrendered in love is transformed into blessing. And the one who lives thus begins to radiate healing power, silently freeing others through the purity of his inner vibration. Thus forgiveness and renunciation are not sentimental virtues, they are laws of spiritual hygiene. Through them, man becomes light enough to rise. Chapter 15. The Renewal of the Will, Living in the Freedom of the Spirit. Every true liberation ends in renewal, a rebirth of the will. For until the will itself is purified, man remains bound, even if all outer chains are broken. The will is the engine of destiny. It directs thought, forms deeds, and shapes fate. When misaligned, it enslaves; when aligned with divine law, it creates paradise. The renewal of the will begins when the spirit consciously surrenders self-interest to divine guidance. It no longer asks, "What do I want?" but, "What is right?" In that simple shift, the entire universe begins to cooperate with it. The old will, driven by desire and fear, constantly strives and struggles. The new will, born of the Spirit, acts effortlessly in harmony with the current of creation. It moves not by compulsion, but by inspiration, and every action bears fruit in peace. Such a will no longer clings, demands, or resists. It flows, serves, and gives. It becomes transparent to the light, a clear channel through which divine power can work on earth. When this renewal is complete, man becomes what he was meant to be from the beginning, an instrument of the will of God. His life ceases to be a personal story and becomes a living expression of law and love. In his presence, others feel uplifted, for the current of peace radiates silently through him. This is true freedom, not license, but alignment. Not rebellion, but harmony. It is the crown of all striving, the rest after long wandering, the homecoming of the prodigal will to its divine source. And so the circle closes. The one who began as a seeker, chained by ignorance, becomes a servant of light, free in obedience and radiant in peace. This is the destiny of man, to renew his will until it beats in unison with the eternal will of God. Chapter 16. The New Humanity, Living Beyond Tribe, Creed, and Blood. A new dawn is rising over the earth, a dawn unseen by the blind, yet felt by every awakened soul. The old earth trembles under the weight of its outworn forms, tribe, creed, race, blood. These once necessary vessels have become prisons. What once served as structure now stifles the spirit that seeks to soar. The time has come for the birth of the new humanity, not a new species of flesh, but a renewed order of souls. Souls who live no longer by inherited names or narrow banners, but by the eternal law of the Spirit. They are the sons and daughters of light, citizens of the kingdom of truth that lies beyond every border. In them, tribe has become humanity, creed has become truth, blood has become spirit. They no longer ask, "Who is my brother?" They know, all who live in the will of God are one. The Grail light exposes the illusion of separation. It reveals that man's true kinship is spiritual, not genealogical. That all forms, race, tongue, religion, are only garments worn for a season, while the inner being is timeless and one in essence. To live beyond tribe and creed does not mean to despise them. It means to see them rightly, as temporary schools through which the spirit learns, but not as chains that bind it. The child who clings forever to his classroom desk refuses the growth intended by his teacher. So too, the soul that clings to ancestral divisions resists the higher unity prepared for it. The new humanity lives by different laws, laws of light, love, and justice. They do not ask, "What does my culture permit?" but, "What does truth demand?" They do not cling to the customs of their fathers when these oppose the will of God. They are fearless, yet gentle, independent, yet obedient, firm in justice, yet radiant with love. Their presence unsettles the old order. The world that lives by blood and creed fears them, for they cannot be controlled by propaganda or pride. They stand as living witnesses that God alone is master, and that every soul is directly answerable to him through the law of reciprocal action. Such men and women are forerunners of the coming light, the pillars of the renewed earth. They are builders of the bridge between worlds, between what was and what must now arise. The new humanity will not be organized, for truth needs no institution. It will simply be a living network of souls aflame with purity and purpose. In their harmony, heaven touches earth once more. Through them, the divine will find human form again. Conclusion. The crown of freedom, the soul restored to its divine dignity. Freedom is not the breaking of laws, but the fulfillment of them. It is not escape from obedience, but restoration to rightful order. True freedom is harmony with the divine law, the soul moving as it was created to move, unbound by fear or compulsion. When man aligns with the will of God, he becomes free. Not because he may do as he pleases, but because he now pleases what he must do. In him, the inner and outer worlds unite in peace. This is the crown of freedom, when the human spirit stands once again upright, clear, and luminous, as it was in the beginning. It no longer bows to tradition, nor rebels against it. It discerns, separating the living from the dead, the eternal from the temporary, the holy from the habitual. Every bondage, every superstition, every false authority falls away. Family becomes blessing, not burden, society becomes field, not prison, religion becomes worship, not control. For the awakened soul no longer lives under these, but through them, serving the light within all. In such a one, all opposites are reconciled, obedience and liberty, faith and knowledge, love and justice. His steps are steady because his will is pure. His heart is quiet because he trusts the law. His life is simple because it flows in rhythm with the divine order of creation. He has found his place, not by submission to man, but by surrender to God. He no longer fears punishment nor craves reward, he lives from the power of being right. And this rightness, this alignment, shines from him as peace, joy, and authority born of light. Thus the story of bondage ends not in revolt, but in resurrection, the resurrection of the true human being. He who once groped in shadows has found the eternal sun within himself. He who once sought approval from men now receives confirmation from heaven. And upon his brow rests the invisible crown, not of gold, but of light. It is the crown of freedom, the sign that the soul has come home to its divine dignity. Epilogue. The birth of the free spirit, from custom to consciousness. Silence reigns after the storm. The clamor of tradition fades, the noise of opinion grows distant, and in the stillness the soul awakens, newborn, yet ancient. It opens its eyes, not to the world of forms, but to the world of meaning. It remembers, I am spirit, I am of the light. And with that remembrance, all chains fall away. This is the birth of the free spirit, the second birth of which the prophets spoke, when man becomes aware of his eternal origin. It is not achieved by rebellion, but by remembrance, not through struggle, but through awakening. Custom had bound him, consciousness has freed him. For custom is repetition without understanding, while consciousness is living participation in divine law. Custom says, do this because it has always been so. Consciousness says, do this because it is right. The free spirit walks quietly through the world, but everywhere he goes, freedom follows. He is the leaven in the bread of humanity, the silent transformer of vibration. He teaches not by argument, but by example. He prays not with words, but with being. His faith is action, his obedience is joy, his life is prayer. He belongs nowhere and everywhere, for he has transcended tribe and creed. He no longer serves the past, he serves the eternal present, the living will of God. And so the great circle closes. The soul, once born in light, descended into bondage through ignorance and fear. Now, through struggle, insight, and surrender, it ascends again, purified, illumined, free. The prison of custom has become the temple of consciousness. The cry of bondage has become the song of praise. And the journey of the spirit ends where it began, in God, in light, in love.